Hey guys, welcome back. So now for this one, we are unpacking so many mysteries. And amongst those mysteries, we are finally learning how Null came to be. So with that said, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so jumping back in, we pick up from after the events of Dark Web, when we saw Bedlam go up against Darkoth the Death Demon, in a fight that split the both of them within two different timelines, to where in one of them, Bedlam won, he killed Darkoth, and at the time we were made aware that this led him back to the Garden of Time, back to Meridius, and eventually to the point to where he'll go after Dylan, just like what we'd seen in Venom issue 7. But in the second timeline, where Darkoth won, he'd go on to appear in Thor issue 27. But in the case of Bedlam, with him being stabbed with the Soul Sword, this would now send Eddie to the Unbeyond, which is where we pick up with him in Venom issue 18. And as we get into this, I'm going to be filling in some of the gaps that were more or less left out of Venom issue 18, since there are a few portions here and there that had already been told in the 2022 Free Comic Book Day story, Venom 7 Seals. So I just figured we'd put it all together here so it'll make more sense. But at this point for Eddie, after dying as Bedlam, we find him in the future in complete utter darkness in a place called the Unbeyond. And when he arrives here, he's greeted by a voice who calls him by name and tells him, Eddie Brock, you walk the path of a magician. And at this point for Eddie, with him falling through time and space yet once again, it takes him a while to get his bearings and even remember his own name in the beginning. But as he spends more time here and throughout the course of this conversation, we'll find that more things begin to come back to him. But initially this voice just goes on to tell Eddie that what he's experiencing is the magician's journey, and from there the voice goes on to explain how magic comes in many forms, as well as the two dominant philosophies that they all fall under, with those being white magic and black magic. And we'll dive deeper into those explanations as well as examples of each as we dive further in. But at this point, the voice goes on to tell Eddie that he is in the Unbeyond, the Qupith of Omega, the heart of the Hive, the true home of the King in Black. But then also it's here where we're shown who this voice is. And initially it's not like a huge shocker, because this is the 7th Venom, who we knew existed since Venom issue 10, when Meridius revealed to Eddie the spiral shape of the garden, which represented Eddie's life spiraling through time. But then also Meridius went on to tell Eddie the different phases he would transform into, with Meridius being number 6. But back when this was introduced, Meridius didn't go into much detail about number 7, but instead he just focused on telling Eddie that eventually everything will lead to him, that eventually Eddie would become Meridius. But for Eddie, not only did this make him aware of the 7th Venom, but this also let Eddie know that whatever this deal is with the 7th Venom and this 7th path, is that it's beyond Meridius, and Meridius isn't as absolute as he would like to make himself seem. And with Eddie now finally making his way here and meeting the 7th Venom, it's here where he lets Eddie know that this place that he's come to within the Unbeyond, it's not a throne room, but rather it's an engine room. And he goes on to tell Eddie that this is where we do the work. And he tells Eddie to tell him what is the work that needs to be done, what road brought Eddie here, and also for Eddie to ask him Eddie's question. And in response, the first thing that Eddie asks about is Dylan. And the 7th Venom lets him know that it's interesting how just a moment ago, Eddie walked in here knowing little about himself and making his way in here broken. But instead of seeking how to put himself together or make himself stronger, the first thing that Eddie asks about is Dylan. And initially for Eddie, he's kind of shocked that the 7th Venom even knew Dylan's name, because again, pieces of this are just coming back to him. But Eddie admits that it's true. And even though he knows that he hasn't been the best father to Dylan, he admits that Dylan is his foundation. So he tells the 7th Venom that he just wants to know that Dylan's safe. And in response, he tells Eddie that Dylan is safe. And to take it a step further, he goes on to show Eddie a glimpse of Dylan from a slice out of time since Eddie's seen him last. And the funny thing is, when we're shown this, we see Dylan back in the Venom form rather than his Codex form, but in this present slice of time, Dylan is beating the brakes off of Norman Osborn. And I mean, it's funny because apparently Norman didn't get enough of a beating during Dark Web, as well as the recent run of Amazing Spider-Man, because now he's front and center on the Venomized World Star. But with showing this to Eddie, the 7th Venom then goes on to tell him that Eddie has 4 questions left. And I mean, at this point, I feel like the 7th Venom should have led with that information. But from here, Eddie then goes on to answer the question of what road brought him here. And Eddie answers by saying Meridius. He's why I'm here. What do I need to stop him? And it's right here where the 7th Venom's kind of like, Eddie, don't waste this. And he tells Eddie that he already knows that answer. And right away Eddie's like, yes, I need my other. I need my son. I need both of them. I need Venom. And the 7th Venom is like, yeah, of course you do. But the question now is, how far will you go to reach them? And without hesitation, Eddie says to the end of the world, all the way back to the Garden of Time if he needs to. And as soon as Eddie mentions the Garden of Time, the 7th Venom then asks him, with the garden coming back as one of Eddie's first memories, why does Eddie remember the garden so vividly? And Eddie responds saying that it was a graveyard, the corpse of every symbiote that ever lived, shaped into a soulless plastic hell. And right away, the 7th Venom is like, is that it? So to you, the garden is just a crime scene. And understandably so, Eddie's like, it's the scene of my crime. But then when Eddie is asked, is it because Meridius is your future? It's right here where Eddie realizes that that's not it, but instead, he is Meridius's past. But then from here, we go through a very interesting timeline, starting with No, because Eddie expresses when he became the King in Black, he jumped into No's shoes without giving it so much as a thought. And because he knew that No was worse than pure evil, he was pure unbeing, a single note of darkness, howling for eternity, the voice of the void. He was nothing. But it was for this reason that Eddie knew when he became King in Black, he wanted to be the opposite. He tried to be everything. He turned the symbiotes into his army, and he told himself that he was giving the symbiotes a choice. He was setting them free. But when Eddie first became the King in Black, and he was jumping from one symbiote to the next and commanding armies of symbiotes, they really didn't have the option of saying no. So for Eddie, he now kind of sees the whole freedom thing like it was a lie that he was telling himself that made him feel less guilty about his crown. And from here, next we go to Meridius, where in his case, at some point in the future, he destroys the mind of every Clintar, to where then he used what's left of them and made the garden. And it's here where Eddie asks if the actions of Meridius were really so much of an illogical pivot, or were they just the rational end to the path that Eddie started. But then Eddie's like, you know what, here's a question that I don't know the answer to. What's the purpose of a power like this? What does it achieve? Who does it serve? What is the King in Black for? And in response, it's here where the 7th Venom tells Eddie that he gave him this answer already when he first arrived here, and he explained to Eddie the 2 dominant philosophies of magic. But also with him saying this, he tells Eddie the breakdown one more time, and he lets Eddie know that there are light magicians and there are dark magicians. And as for the light magicians, he gives Eddie the example of Doctor Strange, while telling him that light magicians worked from closed off sanctums and lofty towers, affecting the world from a place outside and above it. It's an approach that demands a certain self-denial, of the kind that sometimes builds heroes, but not always. And then there are dark magicians, to where here we're then shown Baron Mordo, as Eddie's told that the dark magicians work from the streets, from the gutters, changing the world from its broken heart, a path that can create a taste for worldly power, thus building villains. But not always, because there is no inherent moral superiority in either approach, because both are reflections of entities far above, far below, and beyond. And it's here where the 7th Venom goes on to tell Eddie that he had made his way here via Limbo, the Earth Plane's dark opposite, and that brought him here to the Black Engine, where the work's done. But aside from this engine, there's another engine that is tended to by other entities operating on cosmic scales from their cosmic sanctum, believing that they can control everything from outside of everything. These we call the Ivory Kings, lords of the wild space. They are the kings in white, and they are the Beyonders. And it's mind-blowing, because now we know that Eddie this whole time has been the other side of that coin. And it makes even more sense as the 7th Venom continues to explain it, because he goes on to say that the Kings in Black, they are the Beyonders opposite. And while the Beyonders work from the outside, keeping their hands clean, the Kings in Black work from within it. And it's for this reason that Eddie's bound by the world, to do the work from within, in symbiosis with the entire universe. And the 7th Venom goes on to tell Eddie, the work is the same. You have to maintain Eddie Brock. You, nobody else. Or give up and embrace the eternal end. And in response, Eddie says, like no. And right there, the 7th Venom says yes, exactly like no. And initially, with it sinking in and Eddie hearing this, at first he's like, no, it's not fair. Then 7th Venom says, no said the same. To where then Eddie's like, it should be somebody who can handle it. I'm not the right guy. And 7th Venom's like, no said the same. And after that, Eddie's like, you don't understand. I don't want this job, this work. The cosmos should have been given to somebody who did want it, who could do it. Why me? Why does it have to be me? And once again, the 7th Venom says, no said the same. And it's from here where he goes on to show Eddie, back when the Celestials arrived, they didn't enter Null's void with the intentions of attacking him, but instead they wanted to recruit him and give him a job in this new universe. But much like we'd seen, Null wasn't having it, because he was already the god of nothing. And it's here where Eddie sees this, when he says, with Null having nothing to be responsible for, and he more or less implies that had it been someone who understood with great power comes great responsibility, then it might have played out different. And he says that this should have been Spider-Man. And the 7th Venom even tells Eddie that Spider-Man was born for this role, but life happened and he's not here, you are. And somebody has to take this ride. And with Eddie hearing this, he then heads into his 4th question. He's figured out that Meridius did not want to take this ride because Meridius did not want to become the 7th Venom. And figuring this out takes Eddie into his 4th question, where he asks the 7th Venom, who exactly is he? And to avoid him just saying Eddie Brock, he tells the 7th Venom to give him the long answer. And it's from here where he does exactly that. And he tells Eddie that yes, he is him. He is Eddie Brock. But at this point, he's become much more than that, as he goes on to tell Eddie that he can call him the Eventuality. And the different paths for Eddie are much more complicated than he realizes, because Null is a straight line. He tried to destroy everything in his path from start to finish. And we'll talk about where Null truly begins before this is done. But at this point in time, the 7th Venom, the Eventuality, he goes on to tell Eddie that unlike his opposites, the Beyonders, Eddie isn't stuck in time. He's non-linear, and his path is already split once, back in Limbo when he was fighting Darkoth the Death Demon. But for Eddie, that isn't the last time that his path will split, because he will travel back and forth, restless, rootless, into forgotten pasts, as well as impossible futures. He will lose this power, and he'll regain it again. There are futures where it will happen and some where it won't, and there are pasts where it already did happen, as well as others where it never did. But from here, the 7th Venom can see all of these paths. He can see the whole map, the whole maze, with so many choices that Eddie's made from here, creating so many paths, which all lead back to the 7th Venom, the Eventuality. Because well after this cosmos is gone, when Eddie's work is finally done, he will come here, and he will supervise. Because for the 7th Venom, it is his job to poke and prod and once again supervise this Venomverse of Kings in Black to make sure that none of them eventually become another Null. Because as long as the Eventuality continues to do what he's doing, with moving a thing or two here or there, then the other paths that Eddie will create won't become another Null. But he then goes on to say that when this cosmos ends, he just might, because when this cosmos comes to an end, the Eddie that just got here, he's going to become the Eventuality. And when that happens, the 7th Venom who is here right now, if he chose, he could become Null at the birth of the next universe, which right there explains how the Null that we knew got here. And I mean, I could be tripping, but that kind of sounds like an eventuality if I ever heard one. But with saying this, the Eventuality, the 7th Venom, he goes on to tell Eddie that perhaps he won't be as dramatic, and maybe he'll buy a Maserati and just enjoy his retirement. But for Eddie, at this point, with him understanding the Eventuality, understanding Null, understanding Meridius, and how Meridius created his own mini Venomverse in his own maze, his garden, to avoid becoming the Eventuality, it's here where Eddie expresses that he doesn't understand who he is, or what he is right now, because his physical body has been destroyed, but in the here and now, his scalp hurts, his eye stings, and his back's been aching this whole time. And he doesn't understand how that could be. So for his last question, he asks, what am I? And the Eventuality lets him know that Eddie has the power to save his son, to save his other, and maybe even everything that is, if he would just let himself see it. And with hearing this, Eddie then grows his eye back. And the Eventuality goes on to tell him that his son is half human, half symbiote. He got there the easy way. He was born. But you, Eddie, had to take the back road. You died, and your mind jumped, seeking out a body that belonged to you, that fell under your jurisdiction. You jumped to the garden, a place made of dead symbiote flesh. So is that the only dead flesh in all of time and space that is yours? Let me spell it out, Eddie. You have absolute power over any flesh you command. And while symbiote bodies are shared among all Kings in Black, the human body of Eddie Brock, at the time that you inhabit it, is yours alone. So with that knowledge, what's the work that needs doing, Eddie? What are you going to do? And it's right here with Eddie where he's like, what do you think? I have to fix what is broken. I have to fix myself. I'm going back in and I'm gonna kick my own butt. And man, wow, that's all I can say, wow. Because this has got to be the craziest time loop story. Because with us getting the backstory or the origin of Null, It's like now we have these answers, but I still feel like I got some questions because we know that the eventuality is Eddie, but it also has me thinking, since this was supposed to be Peter, was Peter in this cycle previously? How and where exactly does this information fit in? See, I couldn't have been there with Eddie because I would have been asking way too many questions and I probably would have got kicked out. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.